Okay, are we live now?
Just a second. Yeah, we are live. Let me see if it starts now in the Designscapes page.
I received the notification on Facebook, so we must be live.
Yeah, you can go now, Nicola, I think.
Okay, so we can start, and welcome to everybody. This is actually my first Facebook Live session, even though there's been so many months of lockdown. I haven't been live so far, so I may make some errors or mistakes, but we are here together with Annika Wolff and Antti Nutas. I apologize for if I mispronunciate your surname. I'm Nicola Morelli from Aalborg University in Copenhagen. Annika Wolff and Annika Nutas are from LUT, Lappeenranta University of Technology. And they will present the project SciberCity. But before presenting the project, I should probably spend some words to present the Designscape project. The Designscape project is a EU-funded project in which we are investigating design-enabled innovation in the urban context. So we believe that the urban context is a very stimulating environment for innovation. And what we have done in this project is trying to understand how those mechanisms of innovation have been or could be triggered with a number of initiatives. But I would say the most relevant initiatives we had in this project has been the funding of a large number of innovation projects. We distributed the total of 1.5 million euros to fund 99 projects on design-enabled innovation in 3 calls. In the first call, we were supporting projects in the feasibility stage, trying to understand which projects are more promising. The second call instead was distributing a higher amount of funds for generating prototypes of innovation initiatives. And in the third call, we distributed funds for scalability. This means that these 99 projects we funded so far have been distributed in those 3 calls. But the project has been, I would say, quite successful because it attracted the attention of much more companies, organizations, groups. So although we funded only 99 projects, we received probably, I don't know the exact number, but around 500 applications. So we somehow moved the environment and generated a focus of attention for design-enabled innovation in the urban in Europe. At the same time, we tried also to elaborate the learning from this project and we are been working so far also in the definition of a white paper for design-enabled innovation in Europe that is hopefully supporting future design policies in Europe, because we believe that design can play a very relevant role in the development of innovation, especially in the urban context in Europe. This unconference is in fact trying to, it is at the end of our project. The project lasted 3 years. And this unconference is replacing a real conference, actually, because we were supposed to meet in Florence in June. But because of the lockdown, we decided to do something else. We decided to have to give the opportunity to the co-winners to present their project in sessions like these. Plus, there will be also sessions in which we discuss the main themes, the main learning, and the main issues related to design and policies in Europe. And this will go on until the end of the project, that is the 30th of September. So the unconference has been a very good, is becoming a very good opportunity for us, of course, not only to present the outcome of our project, but also to collect to continue raising the attention of much more people than we would have had in a physical place in Florence. And also we manage, hopefully manage to have the participation of very relevant speakers in the future conferences that will provide their feedback about our project, but also about what should be done in Europe concerning innovation policies and design-enabled innovation policies. The project we are presenting today is SciberCity, and is a project that is personally I'm very interested to this project, so probably I will be the first one to ask questions to Annika, because SciberCity is a project that works with data in the specific environmental data, and raise a very interesting issue, that is how do we make sense of data. So data are describing phenomena that may be visible or not visible. They could be, you know, related to physical phenomena, but could also be related to invisible phenomena. And somehow, when we dispose of data about invisible phenomena, we are able to visualize them, and visualizing those data makes generates a huge awareness of what's going on for something that sometimes we cannot see. I don't know, air pollution. It's something that we do not perceive directly, but when we see data about air pollution, we actually realize that there is a problem with air pollution. COVID has been, you know, the most evident thing, because we do not know what, I mean, except when we see people in the hospital, but many of us have been in lockdown and not seeing any relative or friends sick. But still, the data tell us that it is a relevant phenomenon. It's something that is happening around us, and we need to have, you know, to be careful about our behavior and the way we run our society. So the making sense of data is very important, and I'm very curious actually to see how this project has developed this very important topic, and therefore I think I should now shut up and give the word to Annika for her presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just bear with me one moment while I share my screen and get the presentation underway. So with luck now, you're seeing my presentation. So yes, I'm Annika Wolff, as mentioned. I'm from Lund University in Finland, and I'm going to talk about the SciberCity project. And this was a collaboration between two universities in Finland, Lund and also Aalborg University. And we had another partner, which was the Theatrum Olga, who are kind of a vocational training centre, I would say, in Lahti in Finland, and they train people who are going to be working with youth, and they train them in these kinds of arts-based and drama-based approaches so that they can put them into their practice. And these were the main people that were working in the SciberCity project. So I just wanted to start by giving you kind of like the framing, like why we think this project was important and what we wanted to achieve. So I think it's probably not a surprise that, you know, if you lack experiences with nature, then research has shown that it leads to people not caring that much about nature. So, I mean, on the very sort of mildest sense, that if you don't have experiences of nature and green spaces and wildlife and insects and all of this, then you may be a little apathetic towards it. But at worst, you might develop, for example, biophobia. So you might feel a little bit of anxiety around nature and environments that are unfamiliar. So if you live in an urban space and you don't have a lot of nature experiences, then over time, these kinds of things can actually become manifest within urban design scenarios, both from the point of view of those who are participating in making those planning decisions, and also in those that might otherwise be trying to fight against it or to speak out for environmental concerns. And one thing that happens is that people not just stop caring, but they stop noticing that green space is being eroded. So there's this kind of creep. So on the one hand, you know, if you look at sort of photos, aerial photos of a city in just a short time frame, you might notice that the green space is not rapidly disappearing, but it can be very slow and almost unnoticeable. And then it becomes normalized and people stop noticing this. And then the more they stop noticing, then the more they are going to kind of ignore these potential environmental impacts of planning applications and mobilizing and fighting against them. And you know, humans can give voice to the problem, so they are able to take on this fight. They're able to kind of advocate for their own rights. But you know, the plants and the animals and the insects, they can't do that on their own behalf. So they're really relying on humans to be able to say, you know, what is needed in order to keep, you know, even an urban environment habitable and friendly towards nature, and so that nature isn't more and more eroded. So this was the kind of framing for the SciberCity. We were thinking, like, how can we overcome this? You know, what methods could we utilize in urban design to overcome these problems? And essentially, how can we give this voice back to the non-humans and the environment that has sometimes been you know, lacking within these kinds of design scenarios? And within that, they're going very nicely to what Nicola was just saying. I mean, how might environmental data act as a bridge between people and nature? Because data obviously does have that capacity to make visible something that is otherwise invisible and therefore unnoticed. And how through this process can we help people to care again? So can we somehow use this data to foster empathy towards the environment and these environmental and non-human concerns? And in doing this, can we create a sort of experiential and sensory experience with the data beyond what you might otherwise have if you're just looking at data in the normal means, such as through you know, bar charts and graphs and these kinds of fairly static, fairly traditional kind of data visualizations. So this was our starting point, if you like, for thinking about what we were going to do within the SciberCity project. And our main premise on how we wanted to approach this was we decided to utilize two things. Firstly, arts-based methods, and secondly, data literacy techniques to foster this empathy via this environmental data sets. So I'll just explain very briefly these choices. I should add that we had an expert in arts-based methods, Anna Pazala, who I believe is watching from the Facebook. So she might have been able to do a slightly better job than me of explaining the arts-based methods, but I will do my best. So they're typically used to, I mean, they're very good in sort of fostering empathy. So they're utilized in situations where you may get many different people tackling a complex and difficult issue. In a way, they help people to explore the issue from different points of view, taking on not just their own perspective, but also understanding the perspective of others. So it giving kind of like this polyphonic voice. And I think in this scenario, we were thinking that the arts-based methods would be a good fit with these data literacy techniques, because these are complex problems that need to be looked at from various different angles, including these kind of non-human and environmental angles. And then for the data literacy, it's not always easy to engage people with data, and often if it's presented in the wrong way, especially to people that don't have a lot of expertise in reading data and aren't used to it, then they may be put off, or they may lack the skills in order to be able to fully make sense and understand the data. So we realized that we can't just sort of use arts-based method with data presented in the kind of normal ways that people encounter data, but we need to do some additional work in understanding how to present the data using methods that are designed to make it easier to understand. So answering questions how to frame the data in a way that gives an easy starting point, entry point into the data, and then allows further exploration of what it means. So the idea was to combine these arts-based methods and the data literacy techniques within a kind of co-design process that ultimately would be part of a kind of urban design scenario or urban co-design scenario. And so we would be involving citizens and researchers, but also municipalities in this process. And then the first step in the process that we were looking at was a co-design of what we called future personas. So these are just like personas that you might use in more traditional user experience design or similar activities. And such personas are obviously traditionally used based on data, but that might be data about people and people's habits. And the idea is to develop a kind of archetype of a person that you can then use as a foil against your design decisions. But we wanted to create these kind of future personas because we wanted to utilize data not just about people, but also about the environment and insects and non-human characters. So we wanted a procedure that would allow these different types of data to enter into the process. So in some cases, we wouldn't necessarily have human personas. So we kind of created these future personas as a way of opening up the space possibilities of what these personas could be, you know, with human or non-human or augmented human, and I'll go more into that in a minute. But the idea was that we would utilize these real data sets to learn about the past, to understand the present, and then ultimately to predict the future as a way of kind of understanding how design could be and how the data would sort of inform us how design decisions might be perceived in the future if we take into consideration more than just the human perspective. So we called our future personas cyberpunks, and these were an extension of a previous project that was called Cyberpunk by someone called Jon Lautala. And in this original version, the cyberpunk concept was explored by creating these kinds of, or creating these props, if you like, about the cyberpunk world. And it was created very much through the imagination and just based on sort of ideas of what a cyberpunk could be, thinking about what type of future it could inhabit. It was a very nature-driven creation. So the idea was that these were very connected already to nature, but this connection was kind of just fostered through the imagination of the people that were involved in creating these characters and props and imagining how these cyberpunks would look. So in our updated version, we wanted to draw on this same kind of approach by developing the characters, but we were inspired, we wanted them to be inspired by looking at these real data sets and then using that, as I said, to kind of understand what the future could be. So our cyberpunks were augmented in a way to be able to feel environmental data and then also to communicate about it. So, for example, they may have, you know, a chip that allows them to sense data that's coming in, you know, for example, air pollution or similar data, and then this might be able to be communicated through some physical augmentation or a living tattoo on the skin. So we came up with lots of ideas of how this kind of process could work, but the idea was that the co-design process would inspire the people taking part to come up with their own ideas and their own cyberpunk characters. And we created a setting for trialing and kind of prototyping our approach. And the setting was a kind of swamp area in Lahti, Finland. So this was near the Theatre Molga partner place. And the area was called Linnaistensur. And this nature area is kind of near the city. And so it does offer a place for engaging with nature. But I understand from the discussions I've had, for example, with Anna, our other colleague who's here, I understand that often people that live in the city, maybe especially if they come from more deprived areas, they don't necessarily go to these visit these green areas, even though they may be very nearby. Especially in Finland, you know, it is thought of as being a very green area, but it's not the case that even though everyone has access, they'll be visiting the green areas all the time. So we also were hoping that by using this as a kind of premise for developing our approach, we would also encourage those who are participating in our cyberpunk activities to visit the nature area, and that could, you know, even be part of what we would imagine could be the benefit of adopting an approach like this as part of urban design would be, you know, to have these nature walks, these nature visits, and to really sort of feel and experience nature as part of, you know, a design process. But actually, we intended to have the workshops face-to-face at the Theatre Molga premises, which was in the centre of Lahti and which was near enough to this Linnaisten sewer area that it would be possible also to visit there. COVID actually put a stop to that. So we had all of the workshops planned out, and literally at that time we were then told that there was no way to travel or to have people you know, collaborating in a face-to-face setting. So then we had to move everything online really at last minute, and that meant that we had fewer people taking part. It was much harder to mediate that or to get people interested in doing it at a time that was full of so much disruption and, you know, where people had other things really to worry about. But we did manage to get some people that were really engaged and really keen and interested to do the project, and we sent them care packs. So of course, we wanted people to be developing cyberpunk characters as part of the co-design and building props and doing all of that, but we couldn't provide them with the access to the space and all the materials. So we sent them a little bit at home. So we sent them some art materials, an Instamatic camera so they could kind of document their process in a fun and engaging way. And we also sent them some seeds to grow, which was related to our theme, obviously, of kind of connections to nature. And I should also mention that originally we were going to make all of our activities just around this kind of nature area and the data about this that we could find. And then we slightly changed so that we also included connections to each other, which became more important when everybody was stuck at home, often really on their own during this kind of early COVID times. So just to go a bit more into the arts-based methods now. So the arts-based methods that we were utilising in SciberCity, they were based on a pretext process drama that was influenced by an oral storytelling and literary and performing arts techniques. And I'll try to give some examples of how this actually looked. So one thing was we created an overarching narrative, and this is really important because especially when people were online and they were doing things over a long period of time and often working asynchronously, because it's not really that practical to have 4 hours of co-design over Zoom, especially when you're using arts-based methods. So we utilised a kind of narrative combined with some workbooks that were online that the participants could work through to do our activities. And this framing through the narrative led them in a coherent way through the activities and kind of made sense of it. So we had 2 characters called Shadow and Light, and they were creatures who were born in this Linnaisten swamp area, and they were arguing about the data that we had about Linnaisten sewer and what it was telling them about the past and what it meant for the future. And then we had a kind of a guide who was this raven, Etiainen, who sort of came from mythology and asked participants to kind of step in and help solve the arguments that Shadow and Light were having by helping to kind of interpret and follow what the data was telling them. And to help them follow the data, we sort of supported these kind of sub-activities through which the participants started to create and then adapt their own swamp characters, similar to Shadow and Light, who were called Swarmiats. So these were kind of swamp characters, and they existed in the past. And then by engaging with the activities and interpreting the data from the past into the present, then they started to create these kinds of future characters or cyberpunks, which were these augmented beings, but they were based on kind of predicting what might happen if the data and the trends and everything they were finding out sort of continued. So they're able to imagine, I guess, both good futures based on that and also maybe less good. So utopia and dystopia.
Happily hand by hand, always doing things synchronously. Both them hidden thought being, we find beauty not in the thing itself, but in the patterns of shadows, the light and the darkness, that one thing against another creates. Were it not for shadows, there would be no beauty. One day, a big black raven called Etiäinen is flying towards them, landing on their shoulders, asking,
do you know about the future? Can you please tell me, what will the future look like?
First time in their entire life, happily hand by hand, always doing things synchronously.
Of course, you have technical difficulties as soon as you try to embed video. So it ran out slightly before the end, but that was just to give an example of the overarching narrative that we were using and the characters of shadow and light. So then we also had the data literacy techniques, and these were based on previously used and sometimes card-based techniques. I've given an example of the COVID data that we curated here, but we also curated information about Linnaeus and Sua area from the past and present. But just to give you an idea of the COVID one, we were kind of using these ideas of settings, data settings. So we were focusing on, constraining very well the place and the time in which people were looking at the data and trying to curate it in a way that was meaningful to them and through which they can sort of understand a bit more about the data and then start to discuss the implications. So we combine the kind of data curation and data literacy techniques with the narrative and also with some activities and questions, and really getting them to sort of think and question and query and discuss what these different types of data means. So to give now an example of the activities that we might have or that we did lead them through, then of course I mentioned before that we were trying to get the participants to generate the cyberpunk characters for themselves and to create different versions of this character that would begin in the swamp in the past times and then develop through the current time when the COVID situation was happening, and then to predict what would happen in the future as they became sort of more augmented and their ability to develop new abilities for kind of feeling data and expressing data. And so one of the things that we obviously used was sketching and drawing these characters. So of course you can sketch in different ways. So you can sketch just using pens. You can do sort of art activities where you are getting materials together and making sort of montage and collages with that, or you can sketch through words. So we were doing these different ways of sketching, but also drawing. We were encouraging role play in the characters. So that was a way of getting them to start to really express how the character was feeling based on the information that they were getting that was helping them to build the characters. So this was one route through which we were hoping to foster more empathy. And then we were creating montages, for example, about the nature area based on the data and other information that we had about it. Writing manifestos, so getting people into that mindset of, sort of activism and really thinking about what was problems, what was really meaningful to them, what did they want to say, what was bothering them. So it was a way of getting out these types of emotions and emotional kind of connection to the place. Writing poetry or other type of narratives, and then also starting to augment their characters with these new abilities. So as I mentioned before, maybe the ability to see data or the ability to communicate data through these living tattoos, or to taste data. So we had lots of different examples that we gave. You'll see when I come to the characters in the end that their imagination went far beyond what we originally seeded them with. So this just gives you a kind of idea of the process that we were generating. So it represents a process of creating what we call these future personas, which combines the nature-based data with some participants, with the imagining, with the data interactions, with the drama, through these things like role play, imagination, and sense making, and effectively embedding the data into the drama so that it's part of it. So there's no disconnect. So we try to make everything as coherent and fluid as possible. And then to just talk about who took part. So as I mentioned, in the end, we had to do it on Zoom, and that really limited. So we would have had, maybe 20, 30 more people, and probably involved also some municipality workers and other people we already collaborate with in Lahti around improving the urban space there. Due to the situation being online and everything, then we only had 5 youth education students plus a research team and somebody who was documenting the process for us. One of these people was the person who did the original cyberpunk, so we were very fortunate to have him also participating. We did 5 online workshops via Zoom. But that was really, in the end, that was really just to answer questions and have a bit of face-to-face contact and possibility to just, give instructions a bit more freely. But really, all of the collaboration took place through the WhatsApp group, which we set up for asynchronous communication, and also through these worksheets and through the sharing of activities through the WhatsApp. So people would do activities and then they would take photographs and they would put them on the WhatsApp group, and then we would kind of discuss and make comments on them, and it would inspire us to do more. And I should add that the research team also took part. So we weren't kind of there separate, just pushing them and pointing them towards doing things, but we were a part of it. We were actually taking part, creating our own characters and doing this ourselves. So here are some example of the activity outputs. So you can see the left-hand side, somebody creating a character and then using speech bubbles of what this character might be thinking or feeling. An example of creating a kind of montage, and then another one of somebody who's gone and they've been writing into their notebooks and writing about their character and making a story, but they've gone and photographed it actually in nature. So that was quite nice when people started to share, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But then importantly, I think, is the actual cyberpunks that we produced. And here you can see the main characters that were produced through the process, and they were expressed in different ways. So combining, digital art with analog art, with kind of making and sticking and gluing bits of trees and bark to paper. So I mean, we had no particular instructions or guidance on how to do this, and we left it deliberately free so people could express using whatever they had to hand, at home, and whatever was easiest to them. And just to give 2 examples, so the first character is War Monk, and War Monk is a shaman character who communicates with plants and trees using his staff that he built, using the old world technology. And the staff keeps his mind and his body connected to nature. And then we have Swamp Fairy, who has a crown to listen to what nature is whispering. And just to mention a couple of the others, actually were also having abilities to connect more closely with other humans. And this was important because we had also, as I mentioned, this idea of connections to nature, but also connections to each other, particularly in these difficult moments. So we assessed the workshop activities in terms of what they had achieved from their outputs. So we looked at the future personas, and we realized that they were, at least informed by the real data sets that we utilized in the process, but they were atypical compared to more regular personas that tended to be, really just normal human beings and an archetype of a normal human being using a software system or whatever. But they did actually represent these kinds of more than human characters. Some of them had actually evolved special abilities. They didn't just have technology to give them special abilities, but it had actually really become part of them, part of their very fabric. And these cyberpunk characters all had very strong connections to nature. And actually, even though we're talking about it in the framing, those instructions were not explicitly given to the participants. So that is something that really naturally arrived through the process. So we do believe that the personas could be used for understanding the impact of different design choices. So for example, we could imagine asking, how would Warmonk feel about putting a green bus shelter roofs across the city to increase insect life? So if you remember, Warmonk has the staff for communing with nature. Or how would Swamp Fairy react to this development that would take away the habitat of thousands of insects when she can feel and hear all their voices and would feel that gap? So how would that sudden silence be like for her? So the personas, they offer this way of kind of aesthetic distancing and, being able to imagine or understand the problem through an external representation of a character, which may, be based on your thoughts and feelings, but allows you to sort of to explore them in a different way, in a way that's sort of slightly separate from you. So it might give you a bit more distance and a bit more capability to be slightly objective. What we didn't really manage to do, because we were quite up against it, to do this online instead of in the face-to-face situation, it wasn't so easy to then go the next step and to really consider, because we have these these case studies ongoing in Lahti where we're doing these urban redesign. So it may have been possible to integrate into some of those activities, but that actual next step never quite happened. But still, we have good reason to believe that the personas could definitely be used, and that's something that we will be looking at for future work. And then we also wanted to look for the evidence of the empathy. And here, we wanted to do it in a kind of robust way. So although we kind of felt that there was really this kind of nature empathy, we wanted to find evidence. So we looked for the evidence through the posting on the WhatsApp group. So there were in total 1,138 messages posted during the course of the project. And we did a thematic coding of all of these. Some of them were videos, some of them were things that were reposted from elsewhere, some were pictures, many were uploaded pictures, and some were just chatter. And we coded all of this. About a quarter of the conversation, I would say, was related to actually just practical issues around the actual cyberpunk activities themselves, or sharing outputs of the activities. So that was really what everybody was meant to be there talking about. And then about 3/4 was other conversation. And of that, I think, well, actually over half of the total conversation could be categorized according to conversations around nature and also around arts. So this was part of general conversation, not directly related to the cyberpunk activities that they were doing. And we found that the participants particularly enjoyed growing and discussing the seeds that we had sent them, and also ones that they happened to have themselves. So we did really feel that the nature connections were there, and we felt that the empathy was there. And of course, it's a very small sample. It's hard to draw really conclusions. And, perhaps some of the people that were participating, or all of the people participating, were quite inclined already to, be interested and invested in nature. So of course, there's a lot more work to be done on this approach. But to summarize, we do believe that arts-based methods combined with data literacy can support building these future personas or cyberpunks in a way that could support more than human design processes. And that in this process that we will help to foster empathy towards issues that may otherwise be hidden. So I haven't, of course, talked in a lot of detail, because in this half hour, it's only possible to be very high level. But what I would say is that, this is anyway ongoing, and we're continuing to look into these and to how we can utilize sort of different data sets in similar ways. And we're currently looking at using water data to understand water quality issues, actually also in Lahti and the local lake. So we're adapting this process as we speak, and really thinking about how we can continue it. And then finally, this is the cast, the important people, like the key players who made it all happen. So I think I really want to mention the students of Theatrum Olga, who created those cyberpunk characters and who gave so much of their time and creativity to the process, because that was obviously really important. And then we also have Lasse Kentala, who's the director with Theatrum Olga, Jan Lautala, who was part of the process, but he also created the original cyberpunk, Veijo Ruotanen, who did the kind of cinematography and helped us create nice visuals. And then here is the research team. So Anna Pasala, coordinator in arts-based expertise, Teija Vainio, the design expertise and empathy questionnaires, and Annika, who supported the evaluation of the data as well as the project as a whole, and then myself bringing mainly my data literacy expertise. So that's all that I'm going to be talking about, and I guess now we can pass over for questions.
Thank you very much, Annika. Very interesting presentation. Thank you for this overview. And I don't know if there are questions on Facebook yet, but there aren't. I was trying to have a look at Facebook, and at the moment I don't see.
No, Nicola, there are no questions.
Yes. But so I have some comments and some questions, or some comment questions together. First of all, what is really interesting is the fact that there is this attempt to materialize, as I mentioned in my introduction, to materialize something that is absolutely not visible. As you mentioned, I mean, there are even people that are living close to the nature, but they don't even experience the nature. And so, not to mention, you know, experiencing the data about water or air quality, or the, you know, how healthy the plants in a forest are, or something like that. So that is very interesting. I suppose that your target group for this experiment was mainly youngster, wasn't it?
Well, they were students, but they were adult students, and they were being trained to engage youth. So in a way, we were trying. They were youth, but they were going to be maybe utilising similar methods with younger, really like young people. But we also are interested in this approach as a kind of more general approach, so how it could be used with older people and those who maybe have even different skills around data sets and different interests as well, which I think is also important to realise that people have.
Would you use the cyberpunk, or have you ever thought about, you know, what kind of personification would you have?
Yeah, so we see the cyberpunk as being one possible manifestation of the process. So actually now we are looking at how we might do the process in a way where we kind of frame it as a process in which we use the data to understand the issues, which are also then you know, communicated in some way that will make sense to the audience to which it's intended. So obviously in this situation, as you mentioned it, we were kind of focusing on young people, then something like the cyberpunk makes sense. But if you have older people, then they don't have that kind of same knowledge or feeling or maybe interest in cyberpunk and those types of things. So then the communication and the framing could be slightly different for them, and that's more of an output thing. So it's kind of like I guess it's a prop, it's a tool for understanding what the data could say. But the process that's really important is this idea of, as you mentioned exactly, how do you make the data visible? How do you help people to understand the trends and to care about the trends? So how do you get people to sort of understand that, you know, data tells us something about the past, it can tell us what's happening right now, but the reason why that's important is because it will help us to understand and predict the future, and maybe to, you know, create the future that we want or prevent the future that we don't want. And I think this is the critical point in the process that we were developing, was that kind of how you lead somebody using these arts-based methods on a kind of logical journey through the data to help them to reach their own conclusions, rather than giving them data set and telling them what it means. So in that way, the cyberpunk is a tool, but it's not the only tool, I would say.
Yeah, but it was interesting that even though you say that you know, the characters, the personas they created were not informed by real data, but I suppose that anyway, somehow this triggered a discussion about their relation with nature, I suppose. My curiosity was anyway on whether you tried to try to see how the characters they created could actually take the real data and interpret it. Yes, they've done those characters probably because the characters were just coming from their own imagination. But how can we actually embed the real data so that somehow we try to simulate a behavior of this persona that is based on the real data, and therefore it generates an interpretation of it.
Yeah, actually, just to clarify that the original cyberpunk was the imagined one, but our one, we did take real curated data sets. So that was part of the process, was that we were leading them through this real data. So in the ones that they created, even though it wasn't always plainly manifest in the final character, that was definitely there in the background as the inspiration. But we are, funnily, you should mention it, we are looking actually to sort of really close that loop in a way that we would embed the sort of data sets within the cyberpunk characters in a more, I would say, communicative way. Which is something that we could have done if we hadn't been online, so that we could actually develop a cyberpunk that would really talk about the data sets or talk about the person's interpretation of the data. So what we ended up here was a kind of imagination inspired by real data sets, but where the cyberpunk character was really just kind of talking about these general abilities. Whereas if we were to be able to sort of create, for example, the idea originally was to create sort of like a community artwork, where all of these different voices from the different characters would be able to be channeled through the artwork, so that it could actually then tell the story that one person understood from looking at the data themselves. And as we mentioned with the arts-based methods, then sometimes there are different interpretations and different voices. So it might be possible then to have the single sort of cyberpunk character speaking with different voices from different perspectives. But that's something that we may think about in the future. But definitely in this case, they were looking at real data. But there was, I would say, a small disconnect when they created their final characters, in that they generally were just characters that had the abilities to think about this data, rather than necessarily saying that they could feel specific data set or COVID data or whatever it was that they had been looking at.
But it would be interesting also to see that a character, or create a different or even antagonist character, perhaps, in which there is the character that is generated by the perception or interpretation of the data by people. And then the character that instead is actually generated by the transformation of the real data into some form of narrative. Because I suppose that this cyberpunk, the one created by data, is someone that, I don't know, gets happy when there is, the trees. I'm trying to imagine now, because I really don't know. But I mean, if the trees have enough nurture and water and food, so the character will probably be happier. Or if there is enough water, would be happier. Whereas would be sad if this doesn't happen. I don't know. Is it this that you were imagining?
Oh, it's exactly this. And actually, you've described exactly some of the characters they came up with. But I think you also touched on something that was interesting, which would be, they were imagining, and I guess this is human nature, they were imagining quite positive futures, and they were imagining, well, obviously they're imagining that their character would be sad if bad things happen to nature, and which is a good thing. But it might be also interesting to sort of force them to create the opposite. So it's like the baddie, the one that is happy when the trees are dying. So I mean, I think these are all kind of literary props and things that can be utilized in this kind of scenario to just play off the different points of views. Really to sort of explore what these possible futures could be, because ultimately what we're talking about is, this data is only useful because it's, telling, as I said, it's telling us something about what's happened in the past, so that we can learn and either avoid it for the future or build the future we want. So we do need people to make those connections somehow, and to really get invested in those connections and think about how they, beyond the data, you know, what actually do they need to do to make sure that, you know, their cyberpunk character will be happy, presuming that's what they want, will be happy in the future. So turning that kind of the character-based approach really into design proposals, I would say.
Yeah, it could also be interesting to generate also, as you say, the antagonist, because you know, the debate about environmental sustainability, but this is just one of the many possible phenomena that can be interpreted by data as the, you know, the environmentalist and the negationist. So there are people, I mean, you could also create a cyberpunk character that is only based on you know, on the perception and ideas of those people that think that there is no environmental problem, and so generate the antagonist debate.
Very good point. Yes, the climate denier personas.
I'm asking all the questions. I don't know if there are questions from the audience or comments from Antti too.
None from my side. I think Annika covered the basic concept really quite well already. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
there are not any comment. There is not any comment from the audience in Facebook, Nicola.
Okay, I tried to share the.
I have some questions. Maybe to interrupt the flow. I have a couple of questions, curiosities more than questions. I'm Francesco Molinari. I'm also part of the staff of ANCI Toscana managing the project. So I probably take advantage of knowing already what the project we are talking about today was about. But let me stress a couple of points which impressed me from your presentation, Annika. As a general remark, I created an association, a mental association with theatrical representations, and especially amateur theater in some way. So I have two quick comments or questions starting from this analogy, on which, of course, I would like to hear your opinion, first of all. It is known that the interplay between the actor and the character is something that has many implications, also for the specific personality of the actor himself or herself. So my first question is whether you have any kind of evidence showing transformative effects for the people who participated in this exercise after the exercise itself. And this is my first question or comment. Second point, is there or was there any repeated interaction? So the same question across time. Did you notice any changes in any sort of personal attitude or approach towards the environment, community living, social responsibility? Take it as from any perspective you would like. Thank you for your speech and your answer.
Okay, so taking the first question, I wish that Anna was here to answer this in terms of, you know, these kinds of theatre-based approaches and how people might, you know, change their attitude according to the, you know, different roles. I think that's something that we were planning to look at when we were thinking to do it in the physical space, because we would have everybody together. We would be able to make everybody feel very comfortable and really to, you know, take on these different roles and do this role play. And in the end, when we had these kinds of role play activities, then by necessity, then we couldn't push people ethically to do this and perform in that way online. So we had these activities of role play, and they were at liberty to kind of do them with themselves or with each other. And we weren't there to sort of necessarily watch or assess in the way that we might otherwise have been if we'd all been in one space. So we lost an opportunity there. And the other opportunity we lost was that we were trying to do we really wanted to kind of track the change in empathy over time. And Taya, our other collaborator, had made these really nice empathy questionnaires, which were, taken from some existing questionnaires that kind of looked at people's attitudes towards nature. And if we had done the workshop series as we intended, I think over a period of time, it would have made sense to test the pulse with the larger number of people to see if there were any changes in the empathy. But of course, we still use the questionnaires as part of the approach, but with only 5 people, it was so difficult to draw conclusions. So potentially we did see some changes, but we couldn't call them significant. Maybe Antti wants to comment also on that briefly.
Yeah, and our access to the participants was limited. So, I mean, we interacted over WhatsApp, but it's difficult to tell when you don't have this long-term one-to-one interaction. So we think there is an idea there and we want to pursue that further, but we don't have enough data for conclusive answer. And maybe for the sake of recording or posterity, I'll also read out Anne Passila's comment from the chat that the design they were using was post-Boolean theater practices and not the transformational catharsis type of practice. So that might mean that it's like it might be a side effect, but not maybe the primary intention.
I found, I mean, also the second comment, because I was following from Anna, was that because since I'm not an expert in theater, the two definitions don't say too much to me because I'm ignorant. But I mean, I understand from the second content that the core idea is aesthetic distancing, a critical reflection and awareness of agency rather than behavioral change as such. And so I understand what the spirit of this interaction was, but this also raises another question for me, that is, what kind of did you measure, or did you have try to understand what the impact was on the community around this area? Of course, the problem was that it was probably, the community was probably supposed to be stimulated by the fact that there were people in the area, whereas there were no people because there was a lockdown. But did you have an impact on the community in the area?
I think we had the potential to have impact on the community had we been able to go ahead with our original idea, which was to combine what we were doing within the SciberCity project with another project we have going on at the moment in Lahti. And there, if we'd been able to do this, then we might have really seen if we could take some of these ideas generated through the co-design and see how we could embed them into a kind of urban redesign scenario, which I think I mentioned before. And in that way, I think we could have then started to see if our activities within this kind of small group could have a wider impact actually in terms of helping people to think through the decisions, or just to be more creative in their approaches to thinking about, for example, what use they could have, or when they're redesigning, like a mall area in the city centre, then, could we utilise these personas as a way of helping them to come up with different ideas than they otherwise might have done. So as a tool for, creating more impact, I think we would have needed to have that capacity to, first of all, engage more people to begin with, to include the municipality as well, because that's always important to have them as part of the process, and then to also be able to integrate it to this wider project, because obviously the Designscapes has provided us with a really good opportunity to develop this approach, but it was something which then needs to be taken further through additional funding and additional activities. And as I said, it's still ongoing. Now we're starting to get back to doing it as things get more back to normal, and we actually have an event in just over a week, which is this data drama, and it's really a continuation of this, but without the cyber characters. So we are embedding these ideas, you know, they're living on in different ways. So the impact is happening a bit more fluidly and a bit less directly than we maybe imagined, but I think it still is happening all the same.
Okay, it's interesting, and I would be curious to see how the what the impact would be on for instance public administration, an approach like this, because they are used to numbers and they are used to graphics and so on. But I mean, this kind of approach is of course giving a much more vivid perception of the program. I mean, as Anna was saying, it's about raising awareness, but raising it in a very intimate way, probably because because of the empathy with this character, or anyway because of the empathy that theatrical techniques can actually generate.
Yeah, I think if you imagine that in the majority of communications between municipality and the general public, that there can be quite a barrier, and particularly if they're trying to engage them in facts and figures and data and other environmental issues, or if people want to engage themselves because they, you know, we framed it as kind of people maybe being apathetic, but of course that's not always the case. You know, people do want to engage and say something, but there's so many barriers to be able to have these conversations, and you know, everyone to reach a kind of shared understanding and a space where they can explore the issues in these ways. So I do think, you know, involving the municipality is important to get them to understand that maybe their common practice for engaging the general public is not the most effective, and maybe they can consider some of these methods, maybe not in their entirety, but at least take some, you know, learnings from the things that we've been doing and improve the ways in which they kind of mediate these public sessions and public interactions.
Your work reminds me very much of the work of some artists, two Italian artists, Salvatore Iaconesi and Oriana Persico, which are doing more or less the same. I don't know if you have heard of them, but they generate fake characters, not characters, yeah, I don't know, it's not a person, but it's a sort of impersonification of data that collects and learns through artificial intelligence, learns from the environment. You should probably check their work because it's quite interesting, and yeah, sometimes you know, I was wondering whether it is possible to generate characters that are probably much more close to reality, but are, you know, somehow the personification of you know, that's a situation that is otherwise not visible in the city. Like, for instance, I don't know, the personification of a polluted city would be probably, I don't know, a killer that starts killing people in the virtual reality. I'm just, you know, over exaggerating here, but just to give an idea of how eventually you can actually generate a sort of you know, movie, you know, interactive movie that collects the general feeling of a city or an urban environment or a natural environment or whatever. So it is very interesting and very promising.
I'm
Yes.
definitely looking up those people, so for sure. I'm interested to now go and see their work. Sounds really good.
Yes, I think Besnik put their name because it's not easy to to spell it, but we put their name on the chat. Okay, I think we used all the time and even more the time that we were given for this meeting. It was really interesting meeting and interesting presentation. Thank you for that. And good luck for the future development of this project, because I really hope to hear more about your future work on this, and probably I should keep in contact also for my own personal projects, so to make here some private business in a public place. But
yes.
so, and thank you for thanks to the Sciencescapes to host us. And I think we should meet next time. I don't know when, but the program is on the Sciencescapes page and on the Facebook page, and so we will meet soon. Basically, probably Nick knows when.
Yeah, next appointment is tomorrow at 5:30 Central European Time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.